Okay, it's 5:30 and time to begin our work session. I can't tell if we're all here or not. I don't know. Brad, do we do a roll call or?
We'll do a roll call. Councilmember Cross.
Present.
Holman.
Present.
Licio.
Here.
Abbott.
Here.
And Olson.
Here. Okay, thank you. We're going to jump right into it. It's quite a bit to cover here, so I'll turn it over to Jeremy and we'll hit the deck running.
Thank you, Your Honor and Council. As indicated in the packet, this is the kickoff meeting to the 2021 budget. So we'll go through some of the updates of factors that impact our 2020 budget and beyond. I do have a little bit more property tax information to share with you that I put together, so we can look at that a little bit. Then we also want to be discussing the council priorities and goals for the 2021 budget, as well as we can review the budget calendar. And one of the last things, if we get to it, if not, we can do it during the regular council meeting as well. Brad and I want to talk a little bit more about the CARES federal funding that passed through from the state related to the COVID-19 pandemic and those potential uses for that in the process that we'll be seeking some guidance from the council on in the future. Kind of running two computers here, so bear with me if I'm kind of looking at it away from the
Better you than me.
So for 2021, really there weren't a lot of legislative impacts that impact us. Obviously, as we know, the legislature was consumed with COVID-19 pandemic issues. So we don't have levy limits in place at this point. They are currently meeting monthly in special session, so it's not to say some of those things couldn't change in the future. But as of the conclusion of the second special session, levy limits were not put in place on cities for next year. We continue not to receive or be eligible for any local government aid, as well as there were no changes to the market value homestead exclusion program that was implemented in 2012. One of the recent things that came out was an interim updated state budget projection that was done, and that was done as a result of the pandemic and the related economic downturn. That projection now indicates that the state's budget status went from about a $1.5 billion surplus in February to a $2.4 billion deficit as of, and that would be through the current biennium through next June, as well as the following biennium for the state 2022 through June of 2023. They're estimating right now about a $4.7 billion deficit. So that's just something we want to probably keep in mind a little bit and how that impacts cities as they start to prepare their budgets in the future here. Some of the other, I'll get into a little bit more with some of the property tax information that we have available at this point, and then there'll be more information coming forward in the upcoming meetings, as well as more of that information becomes known for the property tax impact for next year going forward. With personnel related costs, health insurance rates won't be known until later this month. Typically, we have put in a preliminary 12% increase until that actual amount's known. That'll be, of course, based on claims experience at that point. There weren't any changes to the employee retirement system, the para retirement system for police and fire, and the coordinated plan. So those rates remain the same for 2021. Our labor contracts do expire at the end of this year, so there will be some implications potentially there too that we'll have to estimate. As well as one of the other things the league is recommending for workers' compensation to estimate about 10% increase in premiums. And really right now that's just due to some COVID-19 issues, as well as some post-traumatic stress disorders claim costs that continue to escalate for the league. One of the other bigger costs to the city typically has been the fire contract with the city of Brainerd. We're not seeing a significant increase for 2021. It's 0.63% or a little over $2,200. And that's partially just based on a small budget increase over the prior year of about $12,000. And our contribution actually decreased slightly, and that was just due to the various factors that are built into that formula. Our share of the building valuation and proportionately to the rest of the jurisdictions dropped a little bit, so that helped lower our overall increase that we saw for 2021. So then we kind of identify here some of the outside funding requests that we received and budgeted for in the past. We did receive the BLADEC request just yesterday. The request was an increase from 32,000 to 35,000, which is a little over a 9% increase that they're requesting for next year. Central Minnesota Initiative Foundation proposed no change from the $5,330 that they had requested for 2020. And then some of the other costs, kind of looking at in kind of line with workers' compensation insurance premium increases. The league's also recommending about a 10% increase in property coverage, just based on the loss ratios being down over the last 2 years. However, they're higher than in the 5-year average. So kind of looking at some of those reinsurance costs there, at least preliminary increase of about 10% overall, 5% for autos and other liability. And then just kind of the overall looming, question that I don't think anyone can answer right now is just the overall COVID pandemic related costs that may be incurred by cities, as well as any revenue implications that might have. Currently, the CARES Act funding, which we'll talk a little bit more about, as I mentioned later in the meeting, we can fund some eligible expenditures. That's really only through mid-November of this year. There is discussions about potentially extending that longer in Congress. But one of the things that can't be currently used for is revenue replacement. And even that has some potential for discussion too. I know the Congress is potentially looking at that as an alternative maybe to additional aid to states and local governments of letting them use some of their existing funding for some of those revenue replacement needs. But that's not set in stone at this point. So it's really unknown. And then just any other items, I guess, that maybe we haven't thought of at this point.
Jeremy, just a quick question.
Yeah.
When it comes to the league, and I guess I kind of generically ran this by Brad, but if Minneapolis and St. Paul are covered by the league, and I don't know if they are or not, but what is that not going to affect us when all that dust is settled down there and the lawsuits? And are they talking about that at all?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything specifically from the league in that respect, and I can't say whether Minneapolis and St. Paul are pooled in that, but any other city, yes, that would certainly have a large number of claims as part of that overall pool could have the potential for increasing everyone's costs, similar to our health insurance. Some of those larger cities are self-insured too, or have other insurance. I guess that may be something, a good question to kind of ask too, just to get a feel for whether that's going to have implications or if that's going to be a little bit more delayed. I don't know if those numbers would necessarily be known for renewal by January, but yes, that certainly could have some implications if not Minneapolis and St. Paul, if there's other cities that experience some of those claims as well. So then this next table I inserted in your in the presentation here just kind of shows kind of a trend of our tax capacity or tax base for the city. And then in comparison to kind of where our tax increment or TIF portion of that has been. And you can kind of see historically, the TIF is the blue portion at the top. We've kind of hovered anywhere from a low of about 2.1% back in 2012 to 4.4% for 2020, down from 5% last year. 5% actually was the highest. TIF District 6, the Clearwater Estates Apartments, was decertified at the end of 2019 and went back to the tax rolls. So that helped offset some of that increment that was being diverted from the regular tax base to help pay for approved project costs that as part of that TIF district. But we're right around the 4.4% overall tax capacity is utilized as TIF. The other, I think, important takeaway is our tax capacity has rebounded a little bit. You can see back in 2011, we were at $11.6 million of tax capacity. That dropped in 2012 and 13. And part of that is just kind of the lag with the last recession in 2008 and those valuation changes to a low of about a little over $10 million in 2014. And then since then, we've kind of seen some increases that have occurred. So we're now at about $12.3 million of net tax capacity when you take out the tax increment portion of it that's not available for general operations. And then on the right-hand side of that table, it just kind of shows the composition of those tax capacities for those various TIF districts, and the portion that's made up of housing currently is about a third of the overall tax increment. In comparison, we're using about 10% for commercial industrial projects, and then closer to 60% for some city initiative projects. And that would really be our Isle Drive and our Isle and Falcon Drive TIF districts that were established in 2015 to help pay for the Isle Drive project, as well as in 2014 when we established the Excelsior and Edgewood tax increment district number 14 that helped pay for the roundabout and some of those project costs related to that project. So this next table just kind of shows a little bit of the preliminary comparison of 2020s to 2019's abstracts that we received from the Crow Wing County. That kind of shows a little bit of the new improvements that are being added each year, as well as the overall estimated market value before it becomes tax capacity for the city based on those various classifications. So for pay taxes 2021, which would be next year's budget, we kind of look at the spring abstract of this year, and you can see we had a tax base, or estimated market value, excuse me, of a little over $1,067,000 of overall estimated market value for 2021. And then in comparison, in 2020, we were just a little bit over $1 billion overall. So the tax base, the tax estimated market value has increased for the city for 2021. To kind of look at a comparison of what the existing property owners are paying versus the new improvements that are being added, I usually back that information out. So you can see we had for next year's, we have just shy of $10 million of new improvements that were added to the tax base. In comparison to last year, it was about half that amount at about $5.2 million. It's important to kind of note that some of this is within tax increment districts. For example, the entire residential apartments, the $2.56 million for 2021 in new improvements, that's entirely within TIF District 14, the Edgewood and Excelsior TIF District 14 that I had mentioned earlier. And about half or so of the commercial industrial is within existing TIF districts as well. A lot of that within TIF District 14. A lot of that had to do with new strip mall where Chipotle and Five Guys and the cell phone company are located in that second tenant building that was built out front of Camping World. So some of that stuff won't be actually available for increasing our tax base to pay for regular operating costs, but we'll kind of dive into that a little bit further as I get some more numbers assembled for that part of it. But you can kind of see the change in the total estimated market value, excluding new improvements on. So looking at just our existing residential classification, preliminary right now, we're looking at about a 5% increase just in existing valuations. In comparison, looking at the residential apartments, it was about 4.74% of overall increase in that category there. And then in commercial and industrial, about an 8.65% increase there. But as I mentioned, at least half of that I can identify currently within TIF District 14. Just kind of looking at some of the other parcels and see where the rest of that may be made up, if it's non-TIF or not, but we'll look at that a little bit closer in the coming weeks. So overall, about a little less than a 6% increase in the estimated market value when you take out those new improvements. So then just kind of looking at that graphically, the estimated market value of 2021 compared to 2022. Really similar proportions of the overall in comparison from one year to the other. Our residential, homestead, and non-homestead is about 57% of our overall estimated market value, even though number grew in 2021, it's still overall about 57% of the pie. Similarly, when you look at the next biggest one, commercial industrial, the gray area, that also is at about a third in both years. And then to a lesser degree, we have the apartments making up about 8% in both 2021 payable taxes and 2020 below that. And then the other category makes up some of the smaller amounts, the ag and rural areas, as well as some non-commercial, recreational, seasonal properties. I wanted to kind of provide an update a little bit on just some of the economic indicators that we're kind of looking at a little bit as we're kind of going through some interesting times right now that nobody can really put a finger on where we're going from here and how this is going to impact us long term with the pandemic and the current implications that has for the economy. You kind of saw this table a little bit before. The top part of it was looking at the first half property taxes that were initially received on the advanced settlement. And that would have been the property taxes that were paid to Crow Wing County as of May 20th for that initial remittance within 5 days or so of that initial May 15th deadline for payment. And you can see in the shaded area here for 2020, we were down a little bit at about 92% of the overall amount that we normally collect, which was in comparison to the 2008 recession at about also 92% overall. And that really kind of compared to the previous 2 years of collections where we were running, formatting, sorry, it isn't right on here, but the overall amounts that we had collected in the previous 2 years for that first part of it, we were running above 100% of the half of the year's collections at about 105% and 106% for 2018 and 2019, respectively. Then when we received the actual balance of the first half settlement, that's shown on the next bar graph here, we actually are kind of bounced back to where we normally are in 2018 and 2019. We're at 106%. And what that shows is that there was about $500,000 of property taxes that were remitted strictly related to the city's portion of it between that May 20th and May 30th first deadline for that first half property taxes. So there was a significant amount of property taxes that were paid late, but nevertheless, they certainly were paid within a couple of weeks of when they were due and were received by the city, I guess, with that first settlement. So kind of a mixed signal a little bit there. I think a little bit too initially, like I mentioned, property taxes were down pretty substantially initially, but then paid. Hopefully that's not an indicator of how that bodes for the second half taxes that'll be due on October 15th if the pandemic continues to stretch on and people have difficulty paying their bills. And the next table here just kind of looks at the comparison of the lodging tax receipts for the first 6 months of 2020 in comparison to last year. You can kind of see in the blue that we were collecting a little bit more than we were last year during the first 2 months before the pandemic hit. And then that number really plummeted in March and in April, down about 50 to 80% overall, and then continued to be down in May and June, but really running kind of a parallel to where it was the previous year, but just down overall about 41%. So seeing a significant reduction in the lodging tax receipts. Even though during the summer we typically would see those increase, they have increased a little bit, but proportionally to kind of where they were last year, still down significantly. And I think it's important to note that too, because not only is that an indicator of how our businesses are doing in the city, but also the city does retains 5% of that overall lodging tax for administrative purposes. So that does have some impact on our operating budget as well if those receipts are not where they normally have been. And then the balance of the 95% is used for marketing purposes by the Visit Brainerd Lodging Association. One of the next economic indicators is the market value, or excuse me, the motor vehicle excise tax receipts. And we have receipt information for the first 6 months of 2020. Looking at a comparison to 2019, that actually has rebounded where we saw initial drop off in March and April. We see stronger receipts coming in May and June, at least compared to where they were last year. So year to date, we're up about 6%. June was a pretty strong month at about 34% increase over the previous June of 2019. And then one of the biggest economic indicators for us is our local option sales tax. So looking at the receipts, this would be for the initial first 5 or so months of 2020, because there's about a 2-month lag in when the receipts are collected and reported by the business to the state and then ultimately received by the city from the state. The May final amount will be settled later this August, but we are running a little bit higher through May, where we were compared to May of last year. So overall, year to date, it was up about 4.1% in comparison to the same time period last year. What I think is interesting here is, I don't know if this is just an anomaly or what's happening as far as consumer spending, if that's still remaining fairly strong, in part because of some of the stimulus money that's been available to individuals or not. I didn't have a chance to put this on here, but after I updated the information today, late this afternoon, I did receive the initial collection data for June of 2020, and that's down about 35% from where it was in 2019. So I don't know if we're starting to see that trend move the other direction now, where sales and spending is going to finally drop off or not. But the June initial receipts for 2020 were 35% lower than where they were last year for June. So that was just some of the current economic indicators that we're looking at. I won't go through everything on the summary here, but we did include in the packet, similar to last year, just kind of a summary of the various budgets that we do put together. Our general fund is our largest fund that comprises of most of the operations for the city, including streets and public safety, as well as general government and parks and recreation. And then we have a number of special revenue funds that account for legally restricted purposes that we budget for. And that includes the cemetery community development, which includes planning and zoning and building permit data for the building inspections portion of it, as well as our capital parks fund, which is made up of the park dedication fees, our EDA fund, our lodging tax administration fund that I was referencing earlier, and then also our combined tax increment funds that we budget for collectively. And then two of the other funds include the sales tax collections fund, as well as the recycling fund. The recycling fund is one that was funded with the SCORE grant revenues from the state of Minnesota through Crow Wing County. Since that has been discontinued, we're just utilizing the rest of those SCORE funds that we had from Crow Wing County according to the original terms of the agreement that we had with the county and the haulers until those eligible expenditures until those eligible expenditures are paid from whatever funding is remaining. We'll continue to do that, and then I suspect that'll end sometime mid this year. At that point, the remaining portions of the stuff that we housed in there, some of the minor leaf site pickup and stuff, we'll probably just transfer that back to the general fund, because it won't be a big enough fund to continue to have a separate fund for that purpose. And then we budget for a number of capital project funds, including our capital equipment fund. And this is really just a sinking fund for various capital equipment purchases that we're not necessarily purchasing in one specific year, but trying to save for, so we don't have to borrow for those costs of some of those larger ticket items that we don't replace on an annual basis. Kind of a similar concept with our collector street fund, where we set money aside each year to pay for some of those street costs so that we don't have to bond for those project costs. We utilize some pretty significant funding as part of the Cypress Drive project from those funds that were on hand for that project. And then we have a street replacement fund that helps pay for some of those pavement management costs of street maintenance. And similarly with the trails construction fund, kind of the same concept on our trails. And then the last governmental fund would be our debt service fund, where we budget for our debt service payments related to special assessments and capital improvement plan bonds that we have outstanding on the city center property and the public works facility. And then finally, there's 3 funds that we budget for, enterprise funds that we budget for our water, sewer, and stormwater operations. So that was kind of just a synopsis of that. I guess maybe I'll just stop here, I guess, and we'll kind of maybe have some general conversation if there's something, anything the council wants to add, or go from there. But otherwise, really the last parts of this is just kind of looking at the budget calendar, I guess, for the next steps in the process. And then, as I mentioned, kind of some of the CARES discussion that we'll have if we have time later on as part of this work session.
Mayor, I think you're muted.
It probably made more sense that way too, but my question was, where are you as staff with the department heads? Have you had a chance to talk to them, know what they're looking for, or is it too soon in the process? Or
We've distributed budget packets to the departments, and they're kind of working on that. Obviously, listening in a little bit tonight if there's some council priorities and goals that you want them to incorporate in their budgets. And then they'll have an opportunity we'll have an opportunity to talk about those after they turn those back in later next week.
are you expecting any surprises, big stuff?
I don't know that I am, I guess, but maybe I defer to Brad on that one.
So did we, I know there were a couple positions that were budgeted for that haven't been filled yet, as far as I understand. So is that money then it was budgeted for? Is that just a good thing for us that it wasn't spent and that carries over, or, and what's the status with both of those?
Good question.
Well, I guess if a position isn't filled, certainly that, and it wasn't going to be filled next year, that would free up money in the budget to help pay for any other costs that we might be incurring as part of the increases that we just naturally see in the budget, as well as any pandemic related issues that we might have. I guess, so from that perspective, it provides some flexibility, but if they haven't been filled and they'll be filled later, then those would be incorporated and have to be incorporated into next year's budget as well.
So the money that wasn't spent, say for salary this year that was budgeted, that doesn't go away, does it? That just.
If it was reallocated again for that position next year, no, it wouldn't go away. If the council ultimately decided that we weren't going to fill that position at this time because of some of the concerns we have, I guess then that money would be available for other uses, or else to pay for increased costs that we might be seeing elsewhere. If that.
So then do the department heads, Brad, do they let you know how they're doing with workload then? I mean, because the positions weren't filled?
Yes, just to answer the first question, in regards to the positions, one position has been filled. The parks maintenance worker position has been filled as of May. That was a decision that was made in an internal hire transfer that was decided back in February. As to the other position, a directive that was made to the department heads was capital expenditures such as purchasing vehicles, things of that nature that hadn't been put in the queue prior to, I believe it was late April, was to be put on hold. Just not knowing what we were going to do or what was going to happen in regards to revenue and things of that nature. With that same notion, the public works assistant position has been put on hold at this point in time, needed to be reevaluated to determine if we proceed yet this year or commence that for next year. And to answer the question that you had, Mayor, is the directive to the department heads was understand that due to uncertainties, looking at needs rather than wants is a directive that has been given. We've asked that if there is something that is glaring and in need of discussion, to put that in there along with the description on what is the justification or parameters into requesting such, if that's additional FTE or some capital expenditures that haven't been discussed in previous years. So
Maybe this is not totally on the subject, and yet I think it is. Maybe it's a good time to tell everybody where we're at with the interviews and whatnot. Connie's question is about workload and how are we dealing with that? How are you coming on the positions that we have been advertising?
sure. Currently, we do have 3 vacancies. One is the streets and utility supervisor position. We are currently commencing the second round of interviews that will take place on Friday. The goal or objective is to make an offer if we're confident with an individual, make an offer contingent upon council approval and presenting that hopefully at the second council meeting. The receptionist cashier position in finance, currently scheduling first round interviews, and the application deadline for the assistant finance director position. The deadline was this past Friday, so we're currently reviewing applications to determine who we'll bring in for first round interviews.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Your Honor.
Yes.
Is this the time where we're making recommendations or asking questions about priorities for next year? Is the floor open for that?
I'm assuming that's what they're looking for.
All right. A couple of things I think are in the works, and maybe Brad or whomever from staff can answer the question. It would be helpful. But with the acquisition of additional open to the public lands in Southwest Baxter, I think the city has currently funding to do some preliminary planning. If you'll remember, the council and staff had recommended kind of nailing down where utilities, road infrastructure, things like that, where those priorities would be, and probably just look at other related public use planning. So I think we've done some budgeting, for that specific area. So one question is that true? And I think that's intended to be in this fiscal year or this cycle. For next year, though, with the changes in Southwest Baxter, with the changes in sewer, water, street, kind of in the new elementary school neighborhood, and changes in potential transportation and land use, it seems like we're getting close to a time to look at our overall comprehensive plan. Our overall comprehensive plan is a 2015 document. So that means by the end of 21, it's 6 years old. That's certainly a customary time to open the box and start, hiring a consultant to relook at all of these, what I would call significant land use and traffic transportation plans. So in addition to Southwest Baxter, we've got the new alternative transportation plan that we've adopted that looks at that, the bridge planning and things. So that was all north of Highway 210. The reason I bring all of this up is it seems like 21 might be the right time to budget for an overall consultant, 22 probably at the latest. For a comprehensive plan. I guess I would lean on staff in community development to kind of make that assessment or make that judgment so that we have a recommendation to the council as to when the appropriate time to pull a trigger for consultant funding in that part of our budget for overhaul of the comprehensive land use plan or subset specialty minor amendments to that plan. That's my 10 cents.
Do you have any idea, Todd Holman, what or anyone, what would a consultant cost?
I would lean on Brad or Jeremy, with regard to what Stantec was the last consultant. I'd put probably a 10% escalator on it to get at today's value. Honestly, I don't know, but I think we could estimate.
Yeah, it would again depend upon the scope of the work. If it's just a review or if it's update, as Councilmember Holman indicated, areas that need to be revisited and relooked at. Um, Typically, a new comprehensive plan is probably in that $100,000 to $150,000 range. As to a review, I would conservatively say somewhere between that 70 to 100,000. Again, and it's all dependent upon the scope.
Thank you.
The other, Your Honor, Counsel, the other piece that I bring up to that, of course, and I don't know, I get the phone calls about parks and trails things, maybe others do too, but with the addition of the new elementary school, it kind of drives a lot of different questions. You know, one is the planning for park and trail connectivity. The other is transportation. And we've looked a lot at sewer, water, and transportation, you know, the actual road part. We haven't probably had the time to work with the school district to kind of compare notes. And I've been in some communication with a board member, so you've got two voices of one, his and mine. But I think there is some interest in the school district looking at that safe routes to school and that connectivity too, that I think either fits into a sub plan update or potentially a more comprehensive whole plan update. All I'm asking is that we kind of earmark or ask staff to make that consideration so that we can make a good decision when the time is right to consider those inputs.
I heard that the kids over at the new elementary school really would like a dog park as well. So that
You know, there used to be one, they used to go over the jumps and all of that right there.
Barking up the wrong tree there, I think.
oh, jeez.
Well, I know Community Development Director Doty is attending a funeral this afternoon / evening. So he's not in attendance at this work session, but those are noted and I'll share those with him.
Okay. You know, I think we're all interested to see the end of this tunnel, you know, where it's going to shake out. And I know that it's a different year as far as Jeremy getting numbers from the county, all that kind of stuff that goes along with that. But, you know, it seems like to me anyway, that it could be the kind of year that is a matter of survival year, not necessarily, I've said this before, dreams and wants and wishes. And I think Brad already expressed that. He's made that comment, I guess, to the staff too. The staff's always been good. They've always looked out of the best interests of the city, and we'll get through it. I just don't know what that's going to look like sitting here in the 1st of August, but whatever it is, it'll be interesting, I'm sure. Any other comments or thoughts about what you'd like to see in a perfect world?
I'll just note that I think this situation is actually a time where we should be a little bit, I hesitant to say optimistic, but I'll say optimistic about the potential for investments in things like economic development. We're already working with organizations on economic development. As other cities and other parts of the world are pulling in and not looking at that, I think there's an opportunity for us if we would maybe spend a little bit more in that area or focus what we do with the money we do already have budgeted in that part of our budget. I just saw an interesting article. I didn't read the full detail of it, but the gist of the summary was that a lot of people who are capable of working remote who live in the metro are currently looking for places to live, particularly on lakes with high-speed internet. I think we have an excellent opportunity there to maybe grow a little bit with people who no longer want to live in big cities because of what we have going on here. As far as I know, our internet handles everything quite well around here. We've got a good infrastructure for it. So that's just one thought in terms of one way to look at this positively is I would love to see us put a stake in the ground about Baxter being a place to live and work more so than it was even in the past.
Good point.
Those are very good points. Yeah. Very good. Okay. Is that it from you, Jeremy, then for now, or?
Yeah, that's all I really have for tonight. I mean, we'll just continue to provide more information to you as we have it available. And we've got a lot of work to do in the next month or two here to kind of get to that point where the council can kind of set a preliminary levy, because as you know, we can reduce the levy between when the preliminary is adopted at the end of September and when the final is adopted in December, but it can't be increased. So we'll have to get to a point where we're comfortable, I guess, with what that levy will be for at least preliminarily.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Jeremy, I think if you stop sharing the screen, then I should be able to pop up the other one.
Okay, bear with me. I try to remember how to do this. There we go. Maybe.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Everybody seeing the screen?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Just wanted to take a few moments, as we briefly discussed at the previous the last council meeting, is relationship to what we're trying to do to plan for the CARES funding that the governor announced at the end of June for the city of Baxter. This first slide here is just to give an indication of what the federal, state, and private sector have been doing to combat COVID-19. The resources that they've put towards it. Really, the focus of tonight is going to be that first one under the at the top, the Corona Relief Fund. As council is aware, the federal government, the Congress, had passed a bill back in March that took into effect in April, which is known as the CARES Act. This dedicated several, or almost a little bit over $2 trillion of federal funds into to help with the COVID relief efforts on a nationwide basis. Part of that indication or part of that was given to states, and the state of Minnesota was awarded $1.2 billion or $2.1 billion put towards their efforts to combat COVID or coronavirus. From that time till June, the state did not give indication as to any assistance that the state was going to give to the local units of government. However, in late June, the governor did announce, based upon some of the things that both the Democrat and Republican parties were negotiating as part of the special session, that being $841 million that was to be distributed to townships, cities, and counties to assist with COVID-related expenditures. Based on that formula, the city of Baxter was allocated $638,000. Based upon the fact that this is federal funds, there is a bevy of strings that are attached to that, hundreds of pages that the do's and don'ts. And based upon the intricacies of this, the state has in its MMB, Minnesota budget office, they created the accountability office, COVID accountability office, that's being headed by Amy Jorgensen. This is meant to be a sounding board, as well as the state control as to how cities and local units of governments are using the money. As indicated in the last bullet, the state is requiring monthly reporting. The first one here is next week. With that, Jeremy did provide you with a brief explanation as to ineligible expenditures, but there's two really big ones that want to point out, and that's bullet point 2 and 3 in your slide there. As Jeremy indicated, we cannot utilize the funds for lost revenues, including property tax relief or sales tax relief or anything of that nature. Nor can we utilize it for payroll purposes unless those expenditures are directly related to mitigating or responding to COVID-19. So in the context of, let's just use my wage or my salary cannot be utilized to do that, with the exception of the hours that I dedicate towards responding to the COVID emergency. So putting together the COVID plan, doing updates as to that plan, making the changes like we made with the outdoor dining to respond to that. All of those hours that staff, not only myself, but all of staff would be eligible expenditures, but just general salaries or wages would not be an eligible expenditure. What the state has done has there are three criteria that the cities or local units of government have to take into consideration when identifying an eligible expenditure. The first one is that these are necessary expenditures that are related or incurred due to the public emergency. So those that have been in government for quite some time, this would be similar to the but-for test that DEED utilizes for economic development purposes. If not for this COVID, we wouldn't be incurring these expenditures. The second one is that this expenditure could not be budgeted in the 2020 budget for local units of government. If it's an expense that the city was already going to incur, it wouldn't be identified as an eligible expenditure. And then the last one is that the expenditure has to be incurred between March 1st of this year through November 15th of this year. It can't be an expenditure. On top of that, I should say is that the performance or delivery of that service or of that purchase needs to be have occurred and in place at the time of November 15th. So what we have been doing over the last month is trying to get our hands around what we're defining as three categories and really focusing on the first two categories: operating expenditures. As council is aware, we have been tracking the expenditures that we have, such as the extra cleaning of City Hall and other city facilities, as well as the purchase of equipment, things of that nature. What we're really doing right now is trying to estimate what those expenditures will be going forth through the month of November or through the end of the year, projecting that out, as well as our staff time, trying to really get a hold of what we have spent in regards to hours and projecting what those will be over the next several months. The second one, and where we're really focusing a lot of our time recently, is on the capital expenditures. These are expenditures that we have incurred or are intending to incur as a direct response to the COVID. Councilmember Tabbitt indicated improving our network infrastructure at the last council meeting. So we're trying to get together quotes and things like that for purchasing additional equipment, getting software upgrades, things of that nature. But and on top of that, we're really focusing on workplace safety improvements. And as you know, there's a lot of things that we can do to minimize the amount of touching that an individual has to do. May that be with touchless faucets, toilets, doing, and I think Councilmember Holman brought this up at the beginning of the pandemic, is being able to have the doors to the council chambers open without having to touch the handles or doors, putting those push bars in there. And then also other improvements within the city hall, such as our air quality, our HVAC system, things of that nature, where we can improve the air quality for our employees as well as to our residents who come into city hall. And then the last one, which I briefly had contacted a few of you on, is the economic assistance. One of the eligible expenditures is providing small grants to qualified small businesses as well as nonprofits. The conversations that I've been having with my colleagues in other, within Crow Wing County is about establishing a pooled fund with these local units of governments to create a sole source approach for economic assistance. The goal would be to establish uniform guidelines and have these guidelines or criteria be applied countywide, not getting into territorial debates and things of that nature. It creates a one-stop shop for all businesses and nonprofits. It reduces the potential of double dipping and leveraging of resources that allows us to maximize the amount of assistance that we can provide to businesses and nonprofits. Though the details of this concept are still being worked out, but through the conversation tonight, just wanting to obtain feedback from the council as to the support of the concept, as there will be time that I will have to dedicate in working with my colleagues into getting that, getting the program up and running very quickly. The goal or objective is to be accepting applications towards the latter half, end of this month, and using the month of September to review applications and pushing out or awarding funds towards the end of September, first part of October. And the last thing I just do want to bring up is our goal or objective is to have a better understanding of these expenditures that we can present to the council either on the 18th or our regular meeting on the 18th, or at the budget work session on the 26th, be able to go through those identified expenditures and get the council blessing, utilizing those three criteria that I previously discussed or mentioned, so that we can then be hitting the ground running and incurring expenditures on those capital improvements in particularly towards the end of the month or first part of September. And then lastly, as Jeremy indicated, we don't know what the end result is. As you've seen throughout this whole pandemic, the rules change from time to time. And at this point in time, Congress is considering another stimulus bill, but the conversations have been that that'll be focused on individuals and things of that nature, and not be focused on providing assistance to local states or local units of government. The one word that we're hearing is that the loosening of the terms as to eligibility of expenditures, or such as revenue loss and things of that nature, is something that we're monitoring and watching and should be taken in consideration as we start putting specific dollars into those three categories that I mentioned, and we will be bringing up for conversation here shortly. So I know that's a down and dirty explanation of the CARES Act, the money that we received, and what we're doing as a staff to try and identify uses of those funds. So I don't know if Jeremy, if you have anything else you'd like to add to the conversation, but if not, I would entertain any questions that council may have.
I don't have anything at this point. I think you covered it well, Brad.
I don't really have a question. I have more of a comment. I think the idea of pooling our funds together across the county is a good idea. Excellent reasons why, and if we can leverage it to where more people get help, I think that's all the better.
Your Honor, Counsel, Your Honor, were you saying something? You're on mute. You're still on mute. There you go.
Todd, if you could assist the mayor.
Am I on now?
There you are.
Yeah, go ahead.
All I was going to add was I agree with Councilmember Cross. I'm thinking about the unified fund. It's not a perfect analog, but that was a situation where pooling funds, if they're remnant, I hope we do, and it sounds like we will use the methodology Brad described. Completely support that. And then whatever remnant dollar, amount being pooled, because of businesses benefit outside of the city or nonprofits outside of the city, that's still really in this region, Baxter benefits by the good benefits of others in our region. So without doubt, I think all boats float if we use that. The other part was the capacity. I certainly didn't want to see a situation where we had to tap our local city capacity to start metering out and awarding grants and, creating criteria. And, that gets people spun around the axle really quick trying to figure that out. And so if there's a way to work through a county repository and then nonprofit organizations like BLADEC and United Way to distribute and kind of do the footwork, I'm supportive of that.
Okay, anybody else?
I'll just jump in and note, Brad, I hope that you're making sure that our city's interests are being kept in mind in this discussion. The way I read the letter, it just didn't seem, it seems like a great concept that I am 100% behind in terms of leveraging resources and pooling funds. But I was a little concerned, just the wording of the letter sounded like the county had already got it figured out and they're moving ahead. And if you want to jump on board, you're welcome to. And if you don't, they're going to take away their allocation that would otherwise go to your city. So maybe it was just a poorly worded letter in that sense, but I felt a little bit like the county had already made a decision. So hopefully your voice is heard at that table.
Yes, I appreciate those comments, Councilmember Tabbitt. Yes, we've been meeting once, if not twice a week, trying to establish, and those at the table include BLADEC, the county, and several of the cities. So I do know that this was supposed to be a point of sounding board to get feedback from these local units of government. And obviously the reason why I bring it up tonight with the intent that we are scheduled to meet again, I believe Thursday morning, and to try and start working towards getting those factors that are important to us in regards to eligibility, what businesses are eligible, things of that nature, and how those funds are distributed are going to be part of that conversation.
I can't speak for others, but I kind of felt the same way, when I read that. But then I think in talking it over with Brad, one of the problems is the amount of staff time. Our staff is we're short now. We're trying to deal with the things that we have going right now. And then to take on another thing and make those decisions to who's going to qualify and who isn't, could be a little bit overwhelming. And so in the big picture, I guess, I understand it. Probably not exactly the way I would have wanted to see it either. And of course, I think all of our concerns is that Baxter people are in the queue and are taken care of. The added expenses that we've had to take on were funded by our people. So we want to make sure that they benefit from it too. And I think Brad has that picture.
Mhm.
Is there anybody else? Okay. Looks like go ahead, Todd.
Your Honor, I just had a question on timing for Brad and for staff. The meeting scheduled to kind of get a nod, staff is putting together what our eligible costs are as we interpret it now. We will see that maybe in the next meeting. Are we on path to kind of approve those costs to get them bid if required bidding, to kind of beat that November 15? I mean, to me, in government time, that's tomorrow. Are we on path to execute all of those costs that right now that you're developing in time to meet that deadline?
That is our goal, our objective. That is what, working with various departments and, such as the building related, I'm utilizing the building official to assist in getting quotes and things of that nature. So there'll be a lot of delegation, but I do believe that we can hit those timelines that are in that PowerPoint presentation.
It's pretty aggressive. It's one of the disappointing things about the whole scenario is that the legislature was late in getting the numbers out, getting the dollars out, and yet the expiration date, if you will, didn't change. And so it's putting everybody in a really tough spot. It doesn't seem like it didn't need to be that way, but anybody else? Okay, we're a little ahead of schedule. Anybody want to talk about the budget anymore? Or besides you?
You weren't going to call on me. All I wanted to bring up was all I wanted to bring up was last year on the operational budget side, we had discussed, you'll remember Alex and Trevor were kind of making a presentation about the person hours associated with roundabouts and snow clearing and things like that. And so, I didn't want that to escape. I'm sure that conversation has been bookmarked, to be part of what that division or that department is going to bring forward again this year. I just wanted to let Brad, you and Jeremy, and maybe the whole council at least refresh that conversation. We had it once, we kind of put off getting the big equipment. That equipment's a different kind of conversation. But I think it's going to come back. And so, you were asking, what do you want us to tell department managers? Voice of one, just wanted to say that concern. And we're talking about, the roundabouts primarily, the snow management, the pedestrian intersections with the roundabouts, the crossings. We've created every year, we create more. And this year we've created even more. And so those are the concerns I have with regard to, do they touch down in terms of operational costs? Do we have the need for another person? And that's a real number that we have to wrestle with. And then I think we've been kind of looking on the capital equipment piece already, but I just wanted to bring that up again because I don't know where else or what else is going to come from department managers relative to capacity, but that was certainly a conversation we had last year, and I expect we'll see more on that this year. Thanks.
That was one of my concerns too, that I wanted to make sure the department heads, and it sounds like they are sharing their workload. Is it manageable, or do they need more man hours and more people? Or
Okay.
Got one little thing that came to mind in hearing those comments too, that I mentioned last year during the budget, and I don't remember where the email came from, but I saw an email where some residents were actually thankful that there was less mowing along one of our trails that between last year and this year that got cut down in the amount of mowing we were doing. And I just wanted to toss out that in those pictures of equipment and maintenance and future costs, my preference is to try to find ways to mow less, ways to narrow our pavement in future projects to make sure that we don't have to plow quite as much. We don't have to replace extra wide lanes and shoulders when that time comes, things like that. So just a big picture. I'm not saying that there's a specific budget ask there, but tossing that out there is my personal preference in terms of saving money.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, if not, I guess we adjourn for a few minutes and regroup at 7, huh?
So what will happen?
Oh.
Yep. So what will happen is we will